What's going on, guys? Welcome back into the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the Rule 5 draft and everything you need to know about the Rule 5 draft in order to stay successful with it in MLB The Show. We're on MLB The Show 21 today, and let's go ahead and jump into it. The first thing that I want to point out here in today's video, as you will see on the screen already, it says, warning, 40-man rosters must be set by tomorrow, November 20th. Players not protected on the 40-man rosters may be eligible to be selected during the upcoming Rule 5 draft. Would you like to stop simulating? So, anytime you get this message in your franchise, you should go ahead and hit yes. Stop simulating. Make sure you go to your roster and make sure that you have the proper players protected on your roster that you want to keep around. Now, this is where things can get tricky in an off season with MLB The Show, because you're going to end up with players that are potentially available to be selected in the Rule 5 draft, and you're probably going to have to do some finagling with your roster in order to make sure that you protect the players that you want to protect. Let's say your 40-man roster is already full come this time of year. It might be advisable to trade some players away in order to protect your high potential players that are MLB ready that might not be on your 40-man roster yet. But the couple things that I want to get into first here, just a couple of key points for you to know whenever we're talking about the Rule 5 draft is, number one, like we already said, if they are not on your 40-man roster, they are eligible to be drafted in the Rule 5 draft. And what the Rule 5 draft is essentially a competitive balance type of draft that allows teams to select players that are not protected by other teams that they can keep on their MLB roster, and they have to keep that player if they select them on their MLB roster for an entire season. So if you leave a top prospect off your 40-man roster unprotected, chances are good they're going to get selected by another team, and they're going to be playing at that major league level for them for the entire season because they have to be kept up there. Now, many of you guys might wonder, what do you need to do to actually be able to participate in the Rule 5 draft? Well, a couple of things have to happen. Number one, and the most important, and we'll get into some other stuff later, but the number one and most important thing is, if you think you should be eligible for the Rule 5 draft in order to select a player, you need to have less than 40 people on your 40-man roster. I've found out here in MLB The Show that in my experience, if I have a full 40-man roster, it actually does not let me make a pick in the Rule 5 draft. And whenever you go to 39, 38, whatever, it'll let you make picks in the Rule 5 draft. So you have to make sure you have space to draft those players to your 40-man roster, because you're essentially drafting them to your 40-man roster. You're drafting them to your MLB roster. So you have to have space for them in order to participate in the draft. One quick thing to say, November 20th here is right in between Free Agency 1 and Free Agency 2, so it's at the end of Free Agency Stage 1, so it's relatively quick at the start of the MLB offseason. Once you transition to Free Agency Stage 2, you have to have your 40-man roster set, and then you'll go into your Rule 5 draft. If we go ahead and skip about a month forward from that date, the end of Free Agency Stage 1 to December 16th, here you guys can see, if we do view date significance, this is the date of the Rule 5 draft. Players not on the 40-man roster as of this date may be eligible to be selected by another team. So this is when the Rule 5 draft comes around. So you have a couple of weeks there in order to get things figured out for your team. So let's say you have 40 guys on your roster, you have it set. You can try to maybe trade somebody away so that you have space to pick a player in the Rule 5 draft if your team was bad enough to actually have a pick in it, things like that. But, generally speaking, you have to have it done by that November time frame, so start thinking about it ahead of time. So let's go ahead and talk about some strategy here with the Rule 5 draft, players you should protect and players that you should have on your 40-man roster. Now, obviously, whenever you have players on your 40-man roster, they're eligible to be called up to the major league level, and so you're going to start digging into those players' service times. Well, there's a couple of things that factor into play here. So guys that you want to have on your 40-man roster are players that are at an overall or have the specific stats or ratings that you're looking for to be MLB ready. So generally speaking, speaking, I use kind of 70 overall as a good marker point, because a lot of other organizations will probably have openings at positions where a 70 or a low to mid 70 overall player could start for them. So more than likely, for example, Ji-Hwan Bai here, he would go and fill a starting position on another team that could potentially select him in the Rule 5 draft. Right now, he is not protected on my 40-man roster, so this is a player that I would really want to consider adding to my 40-man roster so that they are protected for the future. He's a 71 overall B potential, really young player. That's the type of player that I would be looking to select in the draft. Likewise, we have a couple of other players here. Lolo Sanchez, he's able to be selected because he's not protected. That kind of level of player is what you're looking to protect. And so generally speaking, I go down my roster by overall, and I take a look at, are they on the 40-man roster or are they not on the 40-man roster? And if it's somebody that I can't afford to lose for the future, then I am going to take them and put them on the 40-man roster. A good example here would be John Ryan Murphy. He's a 30-year-old. Doesn't really matter if another team were to take him or something like that. So I'm not going to protect him on my 40-man roster. There's no need to. I'm going to use those spots for the prospects that matter. Like I said, the prospects that have those B potentials, A potentials, guys that you don't want to lose. Generally speaking, you're pretty safe in terms of C potential guys. I try to protect the B and A potential guys, like I said, and getting down into the high 60s, generally speaking, that's, kind of the cutoff point where a player might get taken, they might not get taken. More than likely, a team's not going to want to host a, mid 60 overall player on their roster and keep them on their roster for the entire season, because remember, that's the key here, is that if a player gets drafted here, they have to remain on your roster for an entire season. And so that's where your strategy plays in whenever you're going to the Rule 5 draft. If you want to participate, don't take a crappy player, because they have to be on your roster for an entire season. So the other great thing that you can do here is you can sort by your 40-man roster by just pressing the bumper once. You can go over to your 40-man roster to the left, and you can see, okay, well, who's at the bottom? Let's say I need to clear a space. Who can I get rid of from my 40-man roster that probably shouldn't be there? Okay, well, Blake Cedarland, 61 overall, D potential, probably not ever going to become anything. Let's release him and put a different player on the roster. Take these C and D potential players, take them off your roster, or what you can do is you can remove them from your 40-man roster, and what ends up happening is you place them through waivers, irrevocable waivers. I'm going to go ahead and press OK on that, and you immediately get that 40-man roster spot for them. But generally speaking, if you pass like a D potential player through waivers, they're not going to get picked up. If you put a C potential player through waivers, more than likely they're not going to get picked up unless they are, maybe a high overall and they're pretty young or something like that. But, you don't want to be passing your B potential and A potential players through waivers. Don't take those guys off your 40-man. There are times where, you see here, kind of useless players that are like low 60s but have B potential, or maybe low 60s that are young that could become good, are on your roster. They're on your 40-man roster taking up a space that could be used for like a 71 overall with B potential or a 75 overall with A potential. That could be a conflict there, and a lot of times it's better off to not remove these players. It's better off to maybe trade them or something like that rather than giving them out there to waivers and leaving it up to chance. So we are officially at the Rule 5 draft, so let's go ahead and go to the draft. You guys can see that we have the first pick in this Rule 5 draft, and you guys can see that all top 28 teams here have potential picks within this draft, so like I said, you have to keep that roster spot free if you do want to potentially make a pick here. And if we go to pick a player, you guys will see what type of players are actually here and available for us to pick. So you're going to see a lot of 50s, 60s, those types of overall players. You don't want to just pick these players because they have a potential. That is the crucial point here. If you just start picking a guy because they have a potential, you could potentially hurt your organization in multiple ways. Number one, you're taking up a roster spot that could be used for somebody that will actually help your team. And number two, you're not doing that player any favor. Let's say I took 23-year-old Cameron Meisner, or maybe even somebody that's a little overall, like starting pitcher Xavier Javier. If I took that guy, I'm not doing him any favors because I'm not giving him any time to develop down in the minors, and if I try to play him at a major league level, he's not going to succeed. So what you want to be looking for here whenever you go through this process is you want to be looking for guys that can stay on your roster for an entire season, that will have success, that can develop at the major league level. So, I scroll over to starting pitcher here, and I get a lot of really good options. I get a lot of B potential, kind of young starting pitchers pitchers, these are guys that you could pick up and plug into your starting rotation. Obviously, everybody's going to want to get that A potential guy, but generally speaking, you want to kind of stick to that 70 overall mark, because if they're not over a 70, chances are they don't have good enough stats to really do much at the MLB level. Now, obviously, you could get guys that have specific stats that are good enough, like Cameron Meisner here is a 67 overall with A potential. He's potentially a really, really good pick here. He doesn't really have the bat, his contact isn't very good, but he's a very good defender, and so you could bring him up, you could play him successfully as a defensive player and try to develop his bat alongside of his defensive abilities, but you have to keep in mind that balance there. This player has to be on your roster for an entire season. So make sure you're picking somebody that you can use, and you're picking somebody that you can develop, and you're going to pick somebody that is not going to essentially log jam the rest of your organization, because if you pick up a guy like this, then Joel Dobbs might not be able to come up and play the position that you want him to play or something like that. You have to make sure that you take these things into consideration whenever you're approaching the Rule 5 draft, and only draft players that make sense. So, as the Pittsburgh Pirates here, I know that the Pirates need a catcher. Great example of a player that I might take in the Rule 5 draft would be Robert Byrne here. The reason being, he's got really good contact versus right, really good contact versus left, and really good plate vision. I know that he's going to have a good bat. He's going to be able to bat at the major league level and do it successfully, so that's huge. And then number 2, he's got decent defensive statistics. He's a 74 overall with B potential, and he's only 25 years old, so he could develop into the long-term solution at catcher for me, and this is a perfect answer. So, I might put this guy at the top of my list and go ahead and select that guy. And then, like I said, if you go ahead and draft a player, that player has to be on your roster, going forward. And, you get a couple of picks here in the Rule 5 draft. So maybe, with my second pick, I do want to pick somebody a little bit more experimental, like a Cameron Meisner. So we'll go ahead and select him. We take 2 players in this draft. They're going to bolster our MLB roster. And then we come to round 3 where you get yet another pick. And so, you can take a couple of really nice players that are going to be able to help out your organization long term. And, you can really kind of bolster your roster up and support what you have going on through this Rule 5 draft. And this is why you need to know everything that goes on with it, because it's so crucial. And so you guys can see here, once we get to the later rounds of the Rule 5 draft, round 4, round 5, very often you're going to see that, they're not selecting players. You can see I'm the only person that took a player in round 5 there. More often than not, you're going to see teams just not taking players at this point, because like I said, these guys have to be on your MLB roster. And so how many of these players can you actually field? A lot of times their rosters will be full by this point. You guys can see that I can just keep going because my 40-man roster is like empty right now. I let basically the entire team go in free agency, so I could show you guys exactly what happens here, but I can essentially keep picking until I fill up my roster. And so, you can really take advantage of this system if you guys want to. You get more picks here than you do within the regular MLB draft. You guys can see I am still going to this point. And so you can absolutely fill up your roster. You can do, some pretty nice things here if you are a team that's struggling. Maybe you lost a lot of players in free agency or something like that. So it doesn't always pay to have your 40-man roster completely filled, because you guys can see I'm still going. I'm in round 10, and you can get a lot of really good players this way. So if you want to game the system, you can absolutely do this. I don't know if this is how this works in real life, to be quite honest with you, because I'm not that familiar with baseball. But that's pretty much everything you guys need to know with the Rule 5 draft. The most important part that you have to consider is if you take a player in the Rule 5 draft, they have to be on your team for the entire season. And if you don't protect them on your 40-man roster, they can be up for grabs from another team. So those are your considerations. Hopefully this video helped you guys out in some way. If it did, leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you're new. Comment down below anything else you guys could use help with, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good one.